It's time to take a look at stories making the headlines in Nigerian newspapers, and I have with me in the studio a journalist, Jide Odufowokan, and a lawyer, Jide Ologun. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast. All right, we head straight to the papers now, and I begin with the Daily Trust. Federal government moves to regulate social media space. NUJ supports move. CSOs kick lawyers differ. Only anarchists will kick against plan. And to the front page of the blueprint, federal government media reforms not intended to gag the press. Insists no amount of attacks will stop our efforts. Government committed to sanitizing social media. Lai Mohammed, only non-patriots, anarchists kicking against initiative. And to the front page of the Daily Times, social to federal government sustained closure of Nigeria's land borders, says efforts should be made to resist moves by Nigeria's neighbor to water down border closure policy. Nigerians should commend Buhari's political will. On the front page of News Direct, insecurity, Nigerian army redeploys 9 generals, approves new posting. And on the front page of the Daily Sun now, new minimum wage. Workers declare war on governors. Will resist a breach of agreement. Unions vow. To the Vanguard, minimum wage. Labor threatens shutdown if states break agreement. Tasks states to open their books to the public on revenue. Says states' revenue will determine consequential adjustment. We'll be looking at that shortly. And finally, on the front page of the Nation newspaper, 2 million jobs coming as CBN plans 100 billion naira textile funding. Buhari sector can transform economy. Nigeria loses $4 billion yearly to smuggling. Gentlemen, let's look at this issue on the front page of the Vanguard, talking about the minimum wage. The governors, through the Nigeria's Governor Forum, have said that the consequential adjustment will be based on the states, the capacity of each state. And Labour is saying that the baseline, which is 30,000 naira, the governors had agreed. They were part of the tripartite agreement and so cannot renege on that. But what do you make about this new move now by the governors, saying that it's now going to be based on their capacity, that there will be consequential adjustment or increment, so to speak? I start with you, Dari.
We've said this before. A week ago, we were here discussing the celebration that trailed the signing of that agreement between federal government and Labour. I remember saying it is just the beginning. Because at that point, nothing was being said about the state governors. They were standing aloof as if they were not party to what was going on all along, especially since May this year.
Yes.
The governors have not really participated.
Their body language.
Their body languages and even their body odors were like they have their own intentions, their own plans. Well, the federal government continued with Labour and they reached an agreement. Now, the governors are showing their hands. Now look, congratulations, but we will only pay or will adjust salaries based on our capacity. And that is to tell you that each state, workers in each state, should expect governors to pay them what they feel they can pay. And how fair really is that? That's where the issue is. To me, it's unfair. It will be unacceptable. Where that will be, not only because workers should get their dues and they should not be discriminated against, it is also because it will be a disobedience to a law of the land. 30,000 naira and the increment agreed to by federal government by virtue of our constitution has become law because it is a national minimum wage. Yes, 30,000 naira should be the least any workers should get, agreed. But somebody on level 15 in Lagos State should not given the fact that we say we are practicing federalism, should not be getting 200,000. Why somebody 1115 in Osun State will be getting 80,000? It shouldn't happen. And the governors.
But the capacity of each state differ.
We said this all along. And we said that should be factored into the entire discussion. Or we should restructure. We should look at our constitution again and tinker with it and allow each state to determine what it will pay. As long as we say it's a national thing, the governors should pay. It should not be at the whims and caprices of every governor to decide what I'll pay, while we are claiming that we have a national salary scheme.
Well, let's get Mr. Ologun's perspective to this now. The TUC chairman is saying that the governors, by this statement, are just trying to play games. Is that what you see?
They don't have any choice but to play that game. I think we have symptoms of failing governance system in this country. In 2004, when the minimum wage showed up and it was 5,500, we didn't have any flexing of muscles debating consequential adjustments. It was very comfortable. And in 2011, when it was upgraded to 18,000 naira, we didn't have to shut down the economy or go fighting on the streets. But today, we are in serious crisis in the country. So for me, I think the attention of the labor organization of the government should be on how do we revamp this economy. And it starts by prioritization. Now, when we talk about capacity to pay minimum wage and the consequential adjustments, what about the money we pump into recurrent expenditure, sustaining the executive flamboyant lifestyle and different expenditure that do not add direct value to the economy? Can we look at that? What about revenue generation? What have we done with the massive resources we have within the state? There is no state in this country that doesn't have mineral resources.
This all boils down to the restructuring he spoke about.
You see, you know my argument. We call for restructuring. But if we don't have responsible elements to drive the restructuring, it will be destructuring.
When you say responsible element, what do you mean?
Now, let me ask this question. Let's forget about restructuring. We have bitumen in Ondo State that even came out from under the water. So, are you telling me my governor cannot go into collaboration with the federal government to benefit from those resources?
How many of these governors are thinking in that direction?
That is why I am calling for resourceful leadership. And I think if the engagement is about the economy at the macro level, we will not be. How much is 30,000 minimum wage? It's not up to $100.
It's not.
In 2011, I think dollar was 120 naira.
We see
Today
Chile,
is 360.
We see Chile down in tools, protesting for about 450.
You can see, and that's why we keep advising the government. This back and forth is really annoying the people. We are mobilizing a force in this country, and some of us don't want it. Look at Lebanon now. The Lebanese have forced the prime minister to resign and step out of the way because he himself said he has gotten to the dead end. So, because angry and hungry people are not easy to control. And within the same system, you see flamboyance on one side, you see abject poverty on one side. We just got a report this morning that the CBN is claiming about how many 10 million jobs will be created through textiles. Fantastic. Out of 100 million that we are seeking to lift out of poverty. And if half of the population of your citizens are within the poverty bracket, I think that society is a threatened society.
Indeed. Yeah, you want to say something?
Yes, I want to say something on the issue of the fact that, yes, we may have an economy that is struggling, but insofar workers are working and they are still contributing to that economy, state governors should begin to understand that they will cut down a lot of things and accommodate the wages of laborers. This is what they are trying to do.
When you say cut down, we need to be specific now. Are you saying cutting down on workforce?
No. I wouldn't advise that, especially at a time like this. But even within that workforce, there are a lot of dead woods that these state governors, through their heads of services, can still look at and say, look, it's time for you to go home. There are a lot of duplication going on in the system. You have this agency doing this, another agency doing almost the same thing. Then what do? You just use it to create jobs for the boys. If they begin to cut down on political patronages, the desire to satisfy political associates and godfathers, it will create room for them to see that even within the fund they think it's not enough, they can take care of a lot of things, including wages. And when this happens, you will not be seeing a situation where a state will prefer to hold workers rather than hold political appointees. A state will prefer to hold workers while embarking on white elephant projects. State governors who cannot pay 30,000 naira are talking about building airports next door to another airport that is not functioning. If you have an airport in a state, it is not even being utilized to 50% utilization. And then the next state is planning to build another airport.
So invariably, you foresee a showdown between Labour and the state?
There should be a showdown. I'm not just going to force. I think if the governors would not see people as their primary assignment in governance, then there should be a showdown.
Wow.
Because workers at the state level will feel betrayed by Labour at the national level and the state chapters if they don't benefit. We are talking about state workers now. The private sector is still there.
Absolutely.
All these, there can only be total joy and total happiness when everybody benefits from the good of the land.
Now, this brings up a worrying question because we say every 5 years there should be increment. And at this point, this is just 30,000 naira. We are having this back and forth with. What does this portend for the future of Nigerian workers?
Really hammering on the macro level of our economy. And like Mr. Darius said, that we may be expecting there should be a showdown. From what I am monitoring, where activists grow up to become governors and chairman of party, you may likely end up with a compromise. So you just see the threats and threats and threats. But the point is that if you don't reward the workforce effectively, you are playing down on productivity. And without productivity, both the executive, all stakeholders are threatened. You know, let's look out of the window. Look at Sudan, look at Hong Kong, you see, eventually the people will be mobilized. So I think we must look at how we can reprioritize. You know, as at this point in time, I keep asking the question. The debt profile of my country is about 25-point-something trillion naira. What have we done? It was 12 trillion in 30th of June 2016 or thereabout. So what have we done with all this? We spent about 186 billion naira to organize the last 2019 election. You see, even with an addition recently discovered. So how are we engaging our resources? And we have some resources that are not even within the exclusive legislative list. We have fruits in fact, sometimes I travel to Osun State, and I imagine that you bring a juice-making manufacturer from California to that state,
but the structures like
people. So
people
we need to
look
look inwards and engage our resources. Nigeria has no business being on any poverty list in the world. I think about 4.5% of the resources of the world are deposited in Nigeria. As we speak, we have the largest deposit of proven gas in Africa, about the 9th largest in the world, and we still use firewood. We still complain there is no gas to power the electricity. So when we look at what some countries have done to facilitate prosperity, we begin to do them. And I think that should be the result of even traveling outside of the country to see how things are done. Look at the UAE. They use their resources, borrowed money to create an economic hub.
But our president has been traveling to get all of this for the country.
If not, we keep fighting over minimum wage and intermediate wage and everything. If we don't deal with the foundational base of prosperity that can support whatever we increase or not.
Well, one will only hope that it's not only the president that has been traveling. A lot of other political functionaries have been traveling. And we must give kudos to President Muhammadu Buhari in the last 5 years or so. You see, he has opened up Nigeria for a lot of investors. And more than ever before, in my opinion, many foreigners want to do business with Nigeria. However, there is a clause. And the clause is about the facilities, the infrastructure we would need to, benefit from this opening until we come back home, put in place the required infrastructure. that will ensure that when these people come, they are at ease with us. We may not really get the best out of them. These opportunities.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your contribution on the newspaper review this morning.
Got stories making the headlines in Nigerian newspapers. I have with me in the studio a journalist, Odufowokan, and a lawyer, Jide Ologun. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let's look at the newspapers this morning. We'll start off with the Daily Times. It says, Oshomole to federal government, sustained closure of Nigeria's land borders. And it says here, efforts should be made to resist moves by Nigeria's neighbors to water down border closure policy. Nigerians should commend Buhari's political will. The blueprint is saying here, federal government, media reforms not intended to gag the press. Insists no amount of attacks will stop our efforts. Government committed to sensitizing and sanitizing social media, says Lai Mohammed. Only non-patriots, anarchists, kicking against initiative. The Daily Trust says federal government moves to regulate social media space. NUJ supports move. CSOs kick. Lawyers differ. Only anarchists will kick against plan. The News Direct is saying insecurity. Nigerian Army redeploys 9 generals, approves new posting. That's in the News Direct this morning. And the Daily Sun is saying new minimum wage. Workers declare war on governors. Will resist breach of agreement, unions vow. We'll move to the Vanguard. It says here, minimum wage, labor threatens shutdown if states break agreement. Asks states to open their books to the public on revenue. Says states' revenue will determine consequential adjustments. The Nation newspaper this morning says 2 million jobs coming as CBN plans 100 billion naira textile funding. Buhari sector can transform economy. Nigeria loses $4 billion yearly to smuggling. That's in the Nation newspaper this morning. So we'll stick with the story. The headline in the Daily Trust newspaper this morning says federal government moves to regulate social media space. NUJ supports move. That's the Nigeria Union of Journalists. CSOs kick. Lawyers differ. Only anarchists will kick against plan. Gentlemen, the regulation of social media, is it too little too late? Is it too late at this time, or is this the appropriate time to regulate the social media space? Looking at the fake news we've been having and seeing emanating from some people who have social media accounts.
Well, I'll say it's never too late. We got beaten by the social media bug a few years back.
Yeah.
And before we are very highs, it went viral itself. Then in its going viral, a lot of things went viral. And we are seeing the implications of all that. However, I am for media reforms.
Generally.
Generally. When we say media reforms, it's not just about social media. I'm glad the federal government is coming to explain better by saying media reforms. Reforming or restructuring or regulating the social media is just one aspect of what has to be done. And I am not against it, because if we leave things the way they are, even my own constituency, the media, will suffer more than any other constituency. We are becoming used to statements like people look at you. Somebody who does not listen to the radio regularly, he doesn't listen to the news, television, he does not buy newspapers nor magazines. All he or she does is read these things on social media. And he looks at you in journalists and says, "Are you journalists, you people can lie?" That is what this is doing to us. Then if you look at that, then there is the aspect of fake news that is doing a lot of damage to our national psyche.
Yeah, remember one that says President Buhari was getting married?
Was going to get married.
Yeah.
And it was everywhere. I tell you, maybe because the presidency too did not deny that in good time, I almost believed it. And then the people spreading it were saying it with so much certainty, quoting sources that if you are not careful, if you are not trained, you take them to be authentic and reliable.
True.
But they were not. So fake news, a lot of other things happening on the social media actually needs to be regulated. My issue there is, who will do the regulating? If it is the federal government slamming rules on us, I say no. But if it's going to be a stakeholders thing, everybody involved, I am happy the NUJ is coming out to speak up. There are bloggers, they have their association.
Yes.
There are other stakeholders. Let's have a body of stakeholders. Let's have a body of stakeholders that will sit down and say, okay, this is, because if you give it to the federal government, absolute power corrupts absolutely. You cannot run away from the fact that the government will use it to its own advantage. And in the end, it will not be what we bargained for that we'll get. Okay. Beyond the social media now, the media itself, yeah, we need to regulate the media. We need to look at the media, but it should go beyond just what the media is doing. What the media is getting to, the practitioners, what are they getting? How well taken care of are they? All this should be part of what we want to look at.
In getting a total reform.
A total reform.
All right, so Barrister, he talked about a stakeholders forum where this group of people will be able to implement the reforms. Now, will this change anything?
It should. You know, brilliantly, Mr. Dare mentioned the fact that stakeholders should come together. But let's look at the term reform. It means something was formed, it became deformed, or is becoming deformed.
And so they
and
have
you need to reform it. So what is the focus of the government? If it is an attack against hate speech, I'll bring in the concept of public relations. You see, you need to generate content that will project you in a positive light. Because I recall that many years, the Lagos State chapter of the Nigerian Newspapers of Public Relations, we had a dialogue on bad advocacy. Bad advocacy is in public relations. So I even advise that, Mr. Ilama, you Google your name and find out what is being discussed about you. So there is little you can do about that. You talk about Trump. He has more of negatives going out there. He's least bothered. In fact, the plans to impeach him, I just read a recent report that despite all the plans, the guy is still standing on a solid base. So I will advise that we focus more on the content. I've said it. If by today we have 24/7 power supply in Nigeria, I mean, what has fake news to handle about that? I keep asking this question. Is it not fake news that I was told that we have invested trillions of naira on massive infrastructure, and this year the Senate, the President of the Senate, is asking the federal government to declare a state of emergency on roads? So if you don't want people to checkmate you, then don't communicate. Right, because in communication is not complete unless there is feedback. But having said that, the government has a responsibility to regulate. That is the essence of having government. And curb excesses. But you talk of the social media, the question I'm going to ask now, except we are going to rely on arresting people, do we have the facility, technologically speaking, to even embark on what we are going out to achieve? So are we rather advise this government while trying to reform, that the reform should be sincere, but I think the reform should cut across board, not just in the media. We need governance reform too. We need to provide the basic needs of life that we mobilize the people from this negative experience to positive experience, so they become your loyal brand advocates. And I think that will help us.
Barrister just raised a point now on infrastructures to checkmate, to drive these reforms, to checkmate social media. How do we go about this?
I want to share his worry about we not having the facilities or the infrastructure to checkmate or to carry out what we intend to do when we reform social media. However, I don't think that should deter us. I'll cite examples. The most recent, I think 2 ladies or so went to town to say Davido impregnated somebody, my sister.
But they've been caught already.
That's where I'm going. And it went viral. At a time, the young man was celebrating the birth of his baby boy. And the whole world was rejoicing with him. These 2 ladies sat down somewhere, came up with that grand design to just, and the thing went everywhere. And he was so bothered that he said he was going to ensure that they are dealt with. But yesterday I saw pictures and videos of them in handcuffs, meaning that when we desire to correct something with the right willpower, we can do it. So, and I also know that there was a place in Kano. Somebody posted something that turned out to be of national security on a group chat that turned out to be fake news. And the administrator of the WhatsApp group was arrested. Eventually, the person who posted it was arrested. And the motive behind the post was exposed. It was being sponsored by a particular politician. So with the little facilities and infrastructure we have, if we set out to actually achieve this thing, the first thing we need to do is to create the position in the mind of the individual that there is a punishment for this. If you do this, we'll come after you, and our desire is to get you. If we create that, and we bring an agency like the National Orientation Agency to go, because when you set out to do reforms and you want to sit down and hand down rules, like I said before, it will not work.
Okay.
But if you make up your mind to let the people know what you want to do, we must communicate these desires. We must communicate these reforms to the people. It is when we do, and the people key into what we are trying to do, it becomes easy to implement.
Okay. Now,
implementation becomes easy when the people are with you in what you are doing.
in the light of what you have said now, some people have said at a point that even some people in the presidency propagate fake news via the social media.
I was just about to say, I would love to see Timmy Frank in handcuffs for claiming that some billions of Nigerian naira was mismanaged towards the election, linking the vice president, if that was a fake news. Mr. Dare was making an allusion to the fact that the president was rumored to be planning to get married to another wife. And the first lady ran back to the country. So for me, I think we should focus more on delivering the positives.
Okay.
We learned in public relations that the best form of rejoinder is to do good. You go back to the bad story, you are propagating it more.
Yeah.
So if you have more positives, there is no one that has no negatives. You don't need to bother about people peddled lies about Jesus. I'm for reforms, really. Right. I'm for the control. Okay. But I'm more for performance. You hardly argue with performance. And I think this government should not slip into the trap of being seen as intolerant and seeking to clamp down on people. People must ventilate. There is emotional ventilation. And I appreciate the fact that we have the laws, and Mr. Dare has given us some examples. Don't frighten the people. All right. You see, it's dangerous that way, because by the time you bottle them up and they cannot express anymore, the time they gang up to express, it may not be easy to manage.
All right, Barrister Jide Ologun and Dare Odufowokan, thank you so much for talking to us on this.
Stories making the headlines in Nigerian newspapers. I have with me in the studio a journalist, Dare Odufowokan, and a lawyer, Jide Ologun. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast. We begin the papers this morning with the story on the front page of the Daily Times. Oshomole to federal government. Sustained closure of Nigeria's land borders, says efforts should be made to resist moves by Nigeria's neighbors to water down border closure policy. Nigerians should commend Buhari's political will. On the front page of the blueprint, federal government media reforms not intended to gag the press. Insists no amount of attacks will stop our efforts. Government committed to sanitizing social media. Lai Muhammad, only non-patriots, anarchists kicking against initiative. On the front page of the Daily Trust, federal government moves to regulate social media space. NUJ supports move, CSOs kick, lawyers differ, only anarchists will kick against plan. To the front page of News Direct, insecurity, Nigerian army redeploys 9 generals, approves new posting. On the front page of the Daily Sun now, new minimum wage, workers declare war on governors. We resist breach of agreement, union vows. And to the Vanguard, minimum wage, Labour threatens shutdown if states break agreement, tasks states to open their books to the public on revenue, says states' revenue will determine consequential adjustments. And finally, on the front page of the Nation newspaper, and the story we will be looking at this time, gentlemen, is on the front page of Nation newspaper. 2 million jobs coming as CBN plans 100 billion naira textile funding. Buhari sector can transform economy. Nigeria loses $4 billion yearly to smuggling. Well, this is not the first time we were talking about the reforms in this textile industry, but now we're seeing the government planning to inject 100 billion naira for a turnaround of the industry, well, to create 2 million jobs. I wonder how this comes to you, Mr. Ologun.
2 million. It's a good step, you know, with the promise to migrate 100 million from poverty in 10 years. So if we start with 2 million, and we have 100 billion naira now, but my concern is that how are we going to implement this? That the money won't go down the drain again. And have we looked at how to energize that intention? How far have we gone with the electricity that we need to sustain this industrial move? I know that in Cross River State, the executive governor, Professor Benedict Ayade, set up a garment factory, and he has also gone ahead to create a captive energy generation within Calabar and embarking on industrial moves. If we have this across the country and the government backs it up with policies like this, then we can begin to industrialize the nation, which is one of the symptoms of developed countries, create jobs, and begin to deal, by extension, with the insecurity we have in the country. And of course, by extension also, we'll be able to benefit from the border closure, because we expect that it should be to revive our local productivity and effectiveness. And if all these are sincerely coordinated, I think in no far a time, we begin to see some positive narratives in the country. But if this is just one of the several promises and one of the several funds we have pumped,
it is yet to be seen if it is just going to be a promise or something that will be worked on Dari. But then, like some have said, this shouldn't be the focus at the time. We need to address the infrastructural deficits before we begin to think about injecting funds into the industry, because there has been talks about several reforms, injecting monies into this sector, but no result, so to speak.
Well, as much as I am for infrastructural restructuring and for reforms, I still think we cannot keep waiting until we take will kill the situation. I mean, two different situations at the same time. We can nip it at the same time. Infrastructure, yes. Electricity, key. Good roads, important. But when you look at the effect of some of these collapsing sectors on even our national life, on the individual, on the units, I mean families, communities, we begin to understand that the earlier we begin to think of doing something very urgently, the better. I'll look at the textile sector. As a child growing up then, I had a great uncle who lived and worked in Funtua, Katsina State. He worked with one of those giant textile companies then. I still have some uncles alive today and some cousins who visited him in Funtua and came back with tales of the bubbling city. I mean, town, Funtua, then, because of the textile. It was not just one textile company there. I think there are a couple of textile companies. That the town was alive and bubbling. I am very much aware, being from Ogun State myself, that Ayekpe used to be a bubbling town because of the textile, the lace. They specialize in the production of lace materials. Ayekpe town in Odogbolu local government, Ogun State. I still have memories of what Aswani used to look like.
Absolutely.
When those, Aswani here in Lagos, close to Oshodi, when those textile companies were functioning. And then I know very well what the textile companies on Ibeshe Road in Ikorodu was like. Today, all these places are moribund. Majority of them are collapsed. You have people who were thrown out of work. I have one or two fellow landlords where I live who used to be workers of one or two textile industries, now collapsed. I visited in 2002 as a postgraduate student of the Ibadan University of Kano. I visited some of these places mentioned. I also went to VOM in Plateau State. I was doing a research on the implication of government policies on businesses and individuals. So, and I looked at the textile sector. Yeah. The implications are so much that if government pumps in this money and we do a lot about looking at helping the businesses that will come out of the money to grow by addressing infrastructural decays, job creation will be massive. Aside job creation, we will have created a new brand of business again. You have those, the companies employing people because they will produce these textiles. You have the middlemen who will buy and sell to the retailers, and you will have created different line of business. And it will aid our ongoing border closure policy. If we produce some of these things locally, agenda, we can afford to short out the imported materials. It's a good step in the right direction by government, but implementation is always the issue.
The challenge.
And if we do it well, we'll benefit
we'll get
from
the
it
results.
immensely.
We have to leave it at this point, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your